Well, data centres in Australia is an ongoing topic. The financial gain would be significant, but what would they cost? For artists, there are fears the Australian government will allow AI firms free access to copyright material in return for building data centres. And the PM is going to make a big announcement this week, we're told. But where would these data centres go? Residents in Sydney's lower North Shore have raised concerns about plans for a cluster of up to 5 data centres in Lane Cove. Now, to find out what those concerns are, I'm joined by Sasha Titchkosky from Lane Cove Responsible Planning. Sasha, welcome to McKnight Tonight.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Look, let's have a look at the planned location for these data centres because I've got to give it to you, they definitely appear to be in a cluster. Is your concern based around the number of centres being planned or the building of any data centre?
Well, we already have one data center in
Hmm.
the neighborhood that sort of snuck in, I guess. So it is an established light industrial park. It was set up in the 50s, I think, as the home of a record label, and then converted into an industrial park that has sort of small factory units and things in there, and did have some advanced manufacturing. I think Cochlear had one of their manufacturing plants there. But the real issue is that the current planning framework doesn't actually take into account the cumulative impacts of having a cluster of data centers together. And when you actually have a look at where they are, they're very, very close to residential areas. So the one that is sort of currently undergoing planning approvals is the Goodman proposal at 12 Mars Road. So the closest house to that one is only 16 metres. The
Okay, but
small,
this is in an established industrial precinct, right? So legally it's classified for this thing, but being, I think you said 16 meters from a house, you do have
yeah.
concerns about that. What are your concerns? Is it electromagnetic radiation? What are the concerns?
Well, so far, I guess the concerns that we've really focused on are the noise. So it's a 24 hours, 7 day a week operation, and data centers do emit a constant hum. There hasn't really, there have been some health studies that have been done in the US in relation to that on young developing bodies. So our local public school is only 160 metres away from the data center, that proposed data centre. We don't know what impacts there are on the wildlife. So one of the things that sort of I guess kind of makes this particular location quite special is that it adjoins the Lane Cove National Park and it sits right alongside the Lane Cove River. The Lane Cove River is a state significant river and it feeds into Sydney Harbour. So it's sort of home to a lot of bird life, fish, aquatic life, and it forms sort of part of a really important biodiversity corridor. And none of the planning applications that have been made or were approved even reference the fact that they're neighbouring a national park. One of the other reasons why that's significant is that, say, if we just look at the one proposed data centre that's in planning approval at the moment, it will actually store 1 million litres of diesel and it will have 198,000 kilograms of lithium batteries in it. And they're all to run the backup generators in the event of a power outage. But they're sitting there on site, 16 metres from someone's house, right alongside a national park. And surely you'd have to start thinking about the potential sort of bushfire risks of that. So
That
there's
that
the
would certainly
noise.
be a factor with any complex that's built. Look, Lane Cove National Park is beautiful. Lots of great walking tracks. Absolutely agree. I used to live near the area, so I
Yeah.
understand what you're talking about. Um, but I guess one of the questions that always comes up with these things is it a case of not in my backyard?
Mm.
Is that, I mean, is it the concerns you have, or is it that you just don't want this here, even though these things obviously have to go somewhere?
Yeah, we do sort of acknowledge that they have to go somewhere. I think there are two things that the industry could really more proactively do. One is to stop dismissing the community's concerns and sort of saying, oh, we have a proper planning framework and everything's fine. when you actually sit down and look through the planning documents that are lodged, like they're plainly deficient. Sydney Water said that this proposal, the current proposal, should not be considered until they've had time to actually undertake a thorough review of the water usage for the area, because they don't believe it's sufficient to maintain people's water supply and their drinking
Well,
water.
that's an issue.
That's quite an issue, I think, and one that should be taken seriously by planning and by the proponents. The other is that they could do things to improve the water usage. There are better technologies available. They could look at more efficient uses. They could make sure that they actually are investing in renewable energy to power their data centres. And then maybe really think about whether it's appropriate to have this sort of extractive industry on the banks of a river that flows into the Sydney Harbour and sits alongside a national park. It doesn't mean that there aren't places that wouldn't be suitable for data centres. If you look at proper, really heavy industrial sort of areas, that probably is a good spot for a data centre.
So why do they want to build 5 of them in Lane Cove?
I think because one of them got through when we probably didn't really know what a data center these hyperscale data centers were like. So they're very different from data centers that exist currently all through the city, really, like in basements of buildings, and, they're giant sort of server racks. These are
Well, you
very,
guys have done an Instagram post showing, well, your Instagram post claims that this is what they sell you, but this is what you get.
yeah.
So does really the outside of these buildings, or the one that's been built, look like that one at the bottom?
Yeah, from every other side, other than the small area at the front that sort of sits on the street. So if you're the neighbouring resident, you'll be looking at something like the bottom level. If you're in Blackman Park in the sporting fields, you'll be looking at something like the bottom image. It's just a small part of the front facade that seems to look almost like a nice apartment building. And that's just a small area where the 20 people who work in the data centre will be working.
Would they be able to do anything if they said, we're sorting out the water, we're doing the renewables, all the concerns you've raised? Obviously, you've got an issue with location being near the river and the Lane Cove National Park. But could they do, if they did all the things that you're asking, would it ever be acceptable to you guys?
I mean, I think we can't discount that they could achieve all of those things. But at the moment, what we're not seeing is the industry body, like even when every interview the Australian Data Centre Association does, they continue to justify their sort of business as usual operations and mode of dealing with things. And I'm sort of like, surely we've got some amazing Australian technology that's working in this area that could be implemented. It would benefit Australia, it benefit a new industry. It would improve like the resource usage, the water usage and things. There has to be some level of innovation that can go into improving the way these data centres work, into dealing with the heat transfer impacts of them, light spill. Like, we know this is an area where the vulnerable powerful owl has a habitat. We've got sound recordings of it. Like, the fact that they just don't even think about any of that or consider it at all, I think is the problem.
Yeah, the hum is an interesting one. If you live near that and you're saying it emits a loud hum the whole
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, and if you hear the sound of it or listen to a recording of it, it's really kind of disturbing. So in the US, they've had situations where data centers have gone in agricultural areas, and the cattle ranchers have reported in the area that since the data center was in operation 2 years ago, they've had no live births.
Oh,
And they're sort of things that, we're then 160 metres from a primary school. There are childcare centres nearby. Like, none of those things have been measured. We don't have proper planning standards in place that require, noise limits around things like that, or particular studies that are done on that. And I guess we're not saying like there should never be another data centre built in Australia. We should definitely take advantage of opportunities that might be available to Australia through sort of the investment in data centres. But let's make sure that they're done properly and that the communities aren't left bearing the cost of them because they're not designed properly and they're not compatible with people living alongside them.
Yeah, I just saw a comment, and I think you've sort of just alluded to that because O'Neill Crazy says either we have our own or another country holds all the data for us, charging big money. You're not against data centers being built.
No, not at all. Like they have become part of our life. I think, there's probably a lot the Australian government could do to make sure that Australia actually gets a fair return from them. So some of the studies I've read said that, out of the billions of dollars that are going into the construction of them and into the building of them, only 20% of that will be set aside for Australia. So that'll be, paying the construction workers and the building materials. But the bulk of the investment in them actually goes offshore because they're all servers and things that are built offshore.
Hmm.
And so it's foreign businesses that actually benefit from that. And I think if that's the case, and when we look at what's happened with the gas industry and things, like we really want to be careful that we're not actually just giving away our quality of life, our amenity, our water, our renewable energy targets, like all those sort of things, our wildlife and our natural environment for the sake of kind of profits that are all heading offshore again.
Has there been research into the health effects of these things? I know you mentioned that there were um, non-live births since a data center had gone up.
Mm.
What are the other health effects?
The health effects from the noise are sleep issues. They believe that there are sort of long-term health impacts. There's respiratory issues from the diesel generators. So when they actually fire up those generators, and they have to do that regularly at intervals to actually test that they're working correctly and things. They emit a whole lot of diesel fuel emissions. They actually have lower standards on those diesel generators than they do on car exhausts for diesel cars. So, there are some things like that that the industry association could actually be advocating for and proactively kind of encouraging members to adopt to allay people's fears. But those sort of respiratory issues and then the issues to do with sleep, um, there is some discussion around EMFs and things, but I'm not sure that there's actually been enough research that's done on that. And
It's
so
all
there's a
pretty
lot,
new, isn't it?
yeah, but
There's data
unknown.
centers all over the world. Is any country doing it right?
There's definitely more controls that have been implemented in different markets. So Singapore's got some more stringent controls. The Scandinavian countries do. In Scandinavia, they actually take the heat that the data centers generate and use that in citywide sort of heating systems that they actually have implemented there. Obviously, we don't have systems like that or the need to actually have systems like that. So the heat sort of impacts of data centers are problematic for us, particularly as we start to potentially head into kind of warmer years. And so there isn't really, I think the US, the communities there have been railroaded basically and sort of ridden roughshod over, and they're now sort of really fighting, I guess, to stop kind of data centers in many states in the US. And we can really learn from that and then force the data center operators to actually be at the forefront. Why aren't we leading the world in kind of, green data centers or data centers that don't have negative impacts on the communities and the environments in which they're operating? There's nothing to stop Australia from leading in that and potentially developing technology that could then actually, power data centers around the world. Like, why aren't we thinking about that as a country? We have so much innovation and knowledge and willingness to do new things. We invented Wi-Fi, for God's sake. Like, why can't we do something like this?
Well, it's interesting. These big tech companies seem very keen on having their data centers here in Australia. India are crying out for the work and for the data centers to go there, and they don't seem to want to go there. So we obviously have something here that they want. So we do we aren't just a passenger here. We are in the
Yeah.
driver's seat, and we all acknowledge we need them. You acknowledge we need them. So this isn't a campaign that I'm understanding to just go off the deep end and say no data centers. It's about being responsible with them. Sasha Titchkosky from Lane Cove Responsible Planning. I hope I got your name right that time. I think I stumbled on the opener. Thank you so much for joining us on McKnight Tonight.
Thanks for having me.